Hi, today we'll be coding something based on this animation, but we'll be making it a bit more cheerful. We'll be starting with the grid size, so that's going to be the number of rows and the number of columns. Let's set it to 8. We'll be increasing this later, but for now we don't want to risk a browser crash. We'll compute the total number of cells on the grid, and this is going to be n times n. The body is going to contain everything, so we're going to have a loop while p gets decremented and is still positive. We create our cell elements. And before we move on to the CSS, on the body in a style attribute, we'll be passing that n value, the grid size, to the CSS as a custom property. Okay, now having done this, let's switch. So here we'll be setting display grid, because we want to have a grid there. We'll be setting grid template, and this is going to be repeat. We'll be using that number of rows n. And for the row height, we'll be using, let's say, 90% of the viewport height over n, and something very similar for the column. Okay, the column width is going to depend on the viewport width, not height. Okay, now for the cell elements, we'll be setting a background, and we're going to want to have a gradient. Not a linear one, but we don't have autocomplete for conic. That's the whole deal there. Okay, so this is going to go to transparent. Let's say it's going to go from an angle A, which is going to fall back to 0 degrees. Okay, so something like that. Now we're going to want to register this A, because we are going to want to animate it. So let's say we're going to have an animation duration of 2 seconds and registering it. So property A. First off, syntax. This is like a type, and in this case that's angle. Initial value. This is going to be 0 degrees. Inherits is false, because we don't need it to do that. Okay, now having done this, we can make things a bit more interesting here and use an HSL value that's going to use that angle for the hue. Let's say 85% for the saturation and 65% for the lightness. Okay, now here we're going to have keyframes to 1 full turn. So here we're going to have animation. We're going to use that animation duration. It's going to be linear and infinite, and let's see it. Okay, good. But the thing is, we're going to want to have a delay. And to get to that delay, we're going to need to set a few more things right here. So in a style element, we'll be having a loop. So for, if I could use a keyboard, that would be great. Let I going from 0 all the way up to n, increment this I, and here we're going to have cell nth of type. Not nth child, because the style is a sibling of the cells and it interferes with nth child index. So here we're going to have every n cells plus I plus 1, and it's plus 1 there because the nth of type index is 1 based as opposed to loop index, which is 0 based. And here we'll be setting the column index to the loop index. Okay, and now we'll be taking this, copy paste it, and we'll have something very similar for the rows, except we won't be going every n cells. We'll be going after all the cells on the previous rows, and the row index is going to be j. Okay, now here we'll be computing a middle index, and this is basically the average between the first index, which is 0, and the last one, which is n minus 1. So that's 0 plus n minus 1 over 2, or 0.5 times n minus 1. Okay, and then we're going to have the absolute value of the difference between this middle index and the column index. So that's going to be the maximum between m minus I, the column index, or the other way around, right? So the other way around means we have I here and M here, okay, and something very similar for the rows, except this is going to use the J index for the rows. The thing is, this absolute value, this difference, is going to be a 0 in the middle, where the difference between these maybe even 0 or 0.5. It's either 0 or 0.5 depending on whether n is odd or even, and it can get as big as m on the edges. So for the first column, this index is 0, right? For the first column, the index I is 0. So this difference in absolute value is going to be m. Okay, so it's all the time it's between 0 and m. So if we divide these absolute values by m, we get something between 0 and 1. And if we add up these two ratios, we get something between 0 and 2. And if we want to scale that sum of ratios to 0, 1, we divide it by 2. So that's going to be like a sort of progress for us, what I've just described. So that's sum of ratios divided by 2 or multiplied with 0.5. And we can bring out that over m outside the parentheses. So we have the sum of the absolute values. So like this, and it's going to be divided by m. Okay. And we can introduce that here. So let's say that we're going to have calc, and we're going to use that progress times 1 turn, let's say minus a. Okay, you can see it's starting to look like something. And if we start that right there, and we're going to have an animation delay here, so using that progress value times the animation duration. Let's see it. Okay, but we want the animation to be started from the very beginning for all of them. So this progress goes between 0 and 1. We want these delays to always be negative. That means subtracting 1 animation duration, or subtracting 1 from the progress and multiplying everything with animation duration. That's another option. Now here we can set a background, a dark one. Not quite black, but still pretty dark. I don't know, something like this should do it. Okay, and let's put stuff in the middle, place content center. This only appears to work horizontally, and that's because at this point the height of the body is still limited to the height of its content, which is basically this grid. So let's explicitly set the height of the body to the full viewport height. This creates an ugly scroll bar because of the margin, so if we zero the margin, we should get rid of that. Okay, that fixes it, and we can go back here and increase the grid size to, let's say, 15, and it's going to look more interesting that way. Okay, I could probably make it even bigger, but I'm afraid my laptop is getting a bit too heated, so I'll be stopping it here. I hope you've enjoyed this video, and if you like the work that I'm putting out since early 2012 and you want me to be able to do more in the future, please consider supporting it. You can do so by being a cool cat and becoming a patron on Patreon, or if monthly support is not your style, then there's the option of a one-time donation, or you can get me something off my Amazon wishlist. The links for everything are going to be in the description, or you could at least share this to show the world what can be done with CSS these days, because honestly, I think it's pretty damn cool. In any event, thanks for watching, and until next time, bye!